If you're not already subscribed to this YouTube channel, go ahead and hit the subscribe button now, along with the bell icon so you can be notified whenever a new video is posted. And if you're already subscribed, check and make sure that YouTube hasn't unsubscribed you. And of course, be sure to give the video a like as well as share it on your social media. The white supremacists hate that. And now, the Sunday address. It's just a fact that you're never too young to learn what it means to be on code. In fact, the younger a person is, the more deeply ingrained that principle becomes in them. And likewise, the older a person gets, the less likely they are to get on code or to stay on code. But this is something that we need to discuss, because if there is going to be a future for our people, it's going to begin with the young people and instilling these virtues in them. I recently saw a video online where some young people were poking fun at or otherwise ridiculing an older woman simply because apparently she had passed by. In fact, we see this kind of behavior frequently in the society, and it's been going on long before the rise of social media. And yes, we're talking about young people and having respect not merely for people who are older than them, but also just for people in the society in general. Now, you could try to claim that this is a matter of young people merely being immature. Yes, not just online, it's all around us, and there is a certain amount of that in truth, but let's be honest. We in the Black community have an epidemic of this, and it's not just limited to young people poking fun at some stranger they don't know in the local Walmart or downtown or what have you. This kind of behavior is taught in the home. I said taught. It's not just something that somebody picks up. When parents fail to check their children on certain behaviors, that teaches the child as much as if the parent had actually drilled it into their heads. This kind of thing starts in the home. Parents are supposed to teach their children how to behave in public, and they also should teach their children that respect is a two-way street. And this kind of thing matters deeply, because as we begin to finally exercise the principles of self-determination amongst ourselves, we also have to make sure that the young people understand what those principles are, and they also understand why it's important. You know, it's bad enough when young Black children try to practice this kind of behavior out in the society, but the fact that a number of them think nothing of posting this kind of behavior online says a lot. But then again, why would they think anything of it? If you've ever been on the metro train or the city bus, you also see that behavior there also. You know, about the only place that you don't see too many examples of it is in the airports. And that's because these delinquents don't have enough money to go to the airport, but unfortunately they are able to go practically everywhere else. And when young people are allowed to practice this behavior, as they get older, it degenerates into chronic behavioral problems, which eventually putrefies into criminality. But no matter how you try to slice it, the one thing it doesn't become is being on code. Now, this matters among children, but let's be honest here. In the Black community, we happen to have an epidemic of immature behavior. It doesn't stop when these people are kids. And the level and the spread of this behavior amongst our group, that is something that must be called out. And yeah, while we do see this behavior among other groups as well, it would be a lie to say that it's some Black pathology. The problem is, I'm not talking about other groups. I'm talking about this one, ours. So let's not change the subject. All of us are dedicated to the ideal of an empowered Black society. But no society can endure unless it is an ordered and structured society. It can't just be any old kind of thing. That old 60s idea of, you just let me do my thing and I'll let you do your thing and don't bother me, that is a delusion that Black people cannot afford. Today we hear it as, you do you and let me do me. Well, unfortunately, if you're going to live together as a group, as a society, everybody can't just be allowed to do whatever, because that kind of behavior degenerates. If anything, Black people should be the most sober and serious group on the entire planet, especially considering the odds that we're up against and the dire situation that we're enduring. Instead, we see Black people trying to compete to see who can be the most frivolous, the most unserious. And we see this kind of behavior in all settings, places where it shouldn't be at all. And I'm sure you also notice that in too many places, the main ones who we see Black people poking fun at are other Black people. Now, when people act this way, especially as children, they lack manners and other social graces. When people grow into immature behavior, the odds are they won't grow out of it. Practice doesn't make perfect. Practice makes permanent. It's like a football team that organizes to win a few games even though their strategy is crap and their team organization is horrible. If they're able to win a few games in spite of that, they'll tell themselves they're on the right track. Now, when you screw up and you manage to be successful, or at the very least you don't die, you're going to start to convince yourself that you're getting things right, but in reality, you're behind the 8 ball. This lack of maturity among too many of us, it strikes at the very heart of why it is so difficult to get Black people on code for things. There are too many of us who have conditioned themselves to believe the only thing that they're supposed to be doing is finding something to laugh at. And if there's nothing to laugh at, well, they'll make something up. Black people are always trying to find things to laugh about when there's nothing funny. We've developed a well-earned reputation for being very good at making humor. In fact, that seems to be our main export. Black comedians are the most thoughtful and the most clever in human history. They find humor in places that people didn't even think of. And of course, that's precisely because they were the only ones allowed to be in a venue where black people could speak to a large group without having to sing or dance. It is true that under the king, the court jester is the only one who can speak truth to power. But why comedy in particular? Why did that become the main thing that so many of us decide to focus on as a form of self-expression? Not to play the part of a social psychologist, but when a group of people are being subjected to trauma, their first response is to try to deny it. And that typically will take the form of trying to laugh it off or otherwise make humor about it. It's a defense mechanism, and everyone uses it. If people focus on their trauma and pain, especially when they're powerless to stop it, then they're just as likely to slit their own throats, especially if it goes on for a long time. And for all of these centuries that we have been repeatedly and nonstop traumatized and brutalized, we have a lot of practice at trying to make our suffering bearable by making light of it. We have effectively used humor and laughter as a way to dull the pain of living under anti-black racism. Laughter is the best medicine, but when you take a medication for too long, you can wind up becoming dependent on it. For example, as black people, we oversample when it comes to entertainment in general and comedy in specific. In fact, we are the #1 consumers of comedy. And then we wonder why we can't get black people to ever focus and take anything seriously. Entertainment is mostly for escapist reasons, and we use consuming entertainment as a way to escape the reality of the oppression that we're enduring, but that doesn't work. Confronting the forces of antagonism, though, does. You got black people who will be showing up at a place to protest the police murdering a black person in cold blood, and you'll have some Negroes out there literally dancing in the streets, trying to twerk, acting like it's all one big party. That is not just being off code, that is a mental derangement, and unfortunately too many black people suffer from it. They choose to indulge it. But this rampant immaturity also applies to the organizations that we try to start. You can have a bunch of black folks in a room, all of them can be people who are doctors, lawyers, professionals, PhDs, and yet you will still have a number of them who decide that the proceedings should devolve into some sort of half-baked attempt to try to make people laugh. They'll be trying to find ways to snicker at or otherwise poke fun at other people in the room. It just never stops. This is why it's so hard for black people to have organizations of any meaningful caliber. Now, of course, this is not every black organization to a man, but unfortunately, it happens far more often than it should. Seems that too many black people, no matter what their educational level or tax bracket, are determined to act like children who grew up with no adult supervision. And they're also equally determined and adamant that they will do it at every turn, no matter where they are. They want to turn every organization as immature as they happen to be. Always looking for something to amuse them, or for someone or something they can guffaw at. It just never stops. But if you observe these immature individuals for a long enough period of time, you'll also find that when you go out in public, these are Negroes who are ready to fight at the drop of a hat. More often than not, it isn't those serious and sober black people, the ones who are not always joking and kidding, shucking and jiving, who you see getting into angry fistfights with people. It's usually the very ones who apparently couldn't take anything serious to begin with. That's because their immaturity is a lack of discipline, it's a lack of self-restraint and self-control. And that will contaminate every aspect of a person's behavior in life. That's the reason why the very people who are the fastest to throw hands if you scuff their shoes or if there's some slight, real or imagined, will also be the main ones trying to find things to laugh at, find people that they can poke fun at, etc. This is the reason that the church happens to be a cesspool of scandal and backbiting and recriminations. It's one of the places where instead of people focusing on trying to be more moral, they're instead focusing on how they can have a good old time, usually at one another's expense. This undermines the basic integrity and trust and the ability to have some sort of camaraderie that every organization relies on simply to exist. This has to be called out, and frequently, because you got hood rats, dusty dudes, half-baked social scientists, most of whom are fully baked nitwits, and other assorted big mouths who will be the first ones to make excuses for this kind of mess. And while we are people who have become the most ingenious in the world at using humor as both a sword and a shield, the reality happens to be that when we look at this immature behavior that keeps being put on display, this is not an expression of culture, any more than smoking weed and walking around eating a bowl of cereal out in public is culture. This is the bottom of the barrel having contaminated the entire barrel. Other groups don't cultivate this kind of immaturity, and when they see it among their own ranks, they call it out. And these forever children, regardless of how old or young they happen to be, are out in public. Whenever these people are seen in any capacity, other groups realize who and what they are, and that no organization is going to be effective when it's got people like that inside of it. They are threats to us precisely because they show everybody else that we are theirs for the taking. It marks black people and the groups that we try to have as foolish. And when you're dealing with groups who cultivate seriousness and power, and they see a bunch of laughing, guffawing fools, that looks like prey to them. Nobody will take you seriously, and nobody will respect you. And what do I mean by respect? It means that people think before they deal with you. That's basically what respect means. It means they gotta stop and consider things. They can't just take you for granted. There's a time and a place for practically everything, but when it comes to groups, especially those that are oppressed, there is no time or place for practicing immature behavior. I'm not entirely sure where we as a group picked up these bad habits or decided that it was okay to put them on display for the world, but even without social media, these things should not be happening amongst us at all. I know that there's a number of practices that we've taken upon ourselves that have to stop. When you don't have control over the resources or the rules of your particular group in the places that you live, then dysfunction becomes inevitable. When people are in control, however, they tend to be in control of themselves. That's the entire point of this evening address. As black people, whether you have children or not, we need to make sure that we start striking the right tone with one another, a serious tone, because that's the beginning of respect. We have to make it a point to not allow the lowest common denominator amongst us to set the tone for everyone else. See, this is the reason why it's suicidal to be shy about calling out off-code behavior. And I do recognize that a large part of the reticence that goes along with that is we don't have a robust enforcement mechanism amongst ourselves. Notice the wording that I used. I didn't say we don't have an enforcement mechanism at all. I said we don't have a robust one. And that is important because robustness means not just potency, but it also means ubiquity. Is it in enough places that it can act as both a deterrent or at the very least as a remedy for certain behaviors that we recognize to be against our interest? Admittedly, we're not there. Not yet. But we're never going to get there unless we decide that this is going to be our focus. Look, a lot of black folks have been allowed to get away with all kinds of mess for the longest time, precisely because we fooled ourselves into believing that everything that might have taken hold within our community somehow came from us. And we got to be honest, a lot of the stuff that we have that we do, these are not things that we chose. They were either things that we got saddled with, or they were some sort of dysfunction that we might have picked up along the way. Or it was the result of some aspect or another of our own noble culture becoming distorted or otherwise mangled under the anti-black racism that we endure. You can't be forced to live in the middle of a toilet like white supremacy and then claim that you never got dirty. Well, let this be the beginning of us cleaning up our act. And that starts with us deciding that once and for all, we're going to be a thinking people. We're going to be a considerate people. That we recognize the danger of all of this immaturity that's been allowed to run rampant, and that we fully recognize how it undermines everything that we try to do, from trying to organize groups to making sure that the groups have the spirit that they require in order to be coherent and to be unified. The foundation of any relationship is respect. But a group of people who make it where every single stranger that they meet, or at least every person who's not part of their particular clique, immediately becomes a target for some sort of humor, ridicule, or what have you, these are people who are not practicing unity. They're practicing factionalism. And has that not been the very bane that has cursed us for way too long? Time for a fresh start. And I say that knowing full well, as you do, that these class clowns amongst us, they're not going to like it when somebody makes it very clear that the comedy show is over. But I could care less what they think, because power is no laughing matter. Good evening, and be one. I'd like to take a moment to mention some of our contributors: Ms. Riz Scott, Jimmy Whitfield, Craig Simmons, Sa, and Minnie FBA. Salute to them and thank you to everyone for listening, liking, and sharing this message. Black empowerment only exists because of you.